Thanks so much for coming. I'm Lucia, I'm from the Soil Association, and we've got a really fantastic lineup of speakers today to explore the future of UK horticulture. So we've got Will White from Sustain, Harry Winslett from G's, Rebecca Laughton from Lannock Alliance, and Guy Singh-Watson, founder of Riverford. And before we get stuck into the discussion, I just wanted to quickly reflect on a session that I attended at Groundswell a couple of years ago, actually. And in fact, I think you were on the panel, Guy. It was coordinated by the OGA, the Organic Growers Alliance, and it was unpicking some of the challenges of the horticulture industry. And I remember at the time thinking it was quite niche to see horticulture covered at an event like Groundswell. But as soon as I heard the speakers talking, it became really clear that the challenges they face are actually a reflection of some of the most urgent cracks in our food system today. I remember in particular Jim Applin, who was also on the panel, showing photos of how his area, which is the Vale of Evesham, has changed over the past few decades. And in the original photo, the landscape was covered with market gardens. And then in today's photo, there wasn't a single market garden left. And this felt really poignant because it felt like a very tangible reflection of the state of British horticulture today and to a certain extent, the decline of fruit and veg production in the UK landscape. So at the moment, only 2% of UK farmland is used for fruit and veg production. And as was covered in a Riverford campaign last year, nearly half of our growers fear they could go out of business within a year. And this is having ripple effects across the country, across our environment, across our health. At the moment, the consumption of fruit and veg is at its lowest point in 50 years. Around 1 in 10 children get their 5 a day. And the impacts of dietary-related ill health on the NHS are over 6 billion every year. Another complication is that we're increasingly relying on imports for fruit and veg. So we rely on imports for over 80% of our fruit and nearly half of our veg. And a lot of these are coming from quite climate vulnerable countries. So this is already having disruptions on our supply chains. You might remember a couple of times over the past few years that we've seen shortages on fruit on supermarket shelves of things like peppers and aubergines out of season. So it's a really complex picture, and these are some of the things that we've tried to unpick in a report we've been working on that you should all have on your seat, and if you don't and you'd like one, come and find me afterwards, I can give you one. It's the report that we're launching today that Soil Association has been working on alongside colleagues at Sustain and at the Wildlife Trust. Vicky's not on the panel, but she probably should be. And we've basically tried to outline some of the steps that UK government could take to solve some of these challenges. There's no easy fix, but we've outlined 7 policy recommendations that would help improve the resilience of our sector. I'm not going to go into much more detail because Will be talking about it today, and also you should all have a copy of the report. It's also available online. But it felt really important for the report launch to also hear from other voices that are working really hard to resolve some of these challenges. And particularly because it feels like ultimately a kind of collaborative and cohesive, unified voice in our message when we're calling for this positive change is really important. So thanks all for being here today. Great. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Will, who's going to kick us off. Then we'll hear from each of the speakers briefly before opening up for discussion.
Thanks, Lucia. I'm Will. I'm the Sustainable Farming Coordinator for Sustain. Sustain are an alliance of charities trying to work towards a kind of better food and farming system. Topically, DEFRA released their horticulture statistics for 2023, and it's pretty grim reading. Vegetable production has gone down 5% in the last year. That's 2.2 million tonnes of vegetables lost to production, and that's not a kind of one-off. The trend has been downwards for the last 20 years. If it were to drop 5% each year, we'd be losing half of our industry, which is already beleaguered, within 10 years. It's not great reading for fruit either. We were 17% self-sufficient on fruit, and now we're 16. So it's this report is quite topical, I think. We spoke to growers, small and large, and tried to draw out some of the challenges which are facing. There are some really unifying ones. I think the first one is the variable climate we're having. Wetter springs, later frosts, difficult harvest times are making it even tougher for growers. It's not like their job is easy as it is, and they need ways to adapt. The second one, and this is huge, is the market isn't working for them. We've got really, really unfair prices. Some of the research Sustain did showed that six apples, bag of apples, the grower would get 1p, less than 1p of the profit for that if it was sold to a retailer. This is kind of an untenable amount of pressure which retailers are putting on growers, and the risk isn't being spread fairly across the supply chain. And finally, government just aren't taking horticulture seriously enough. And that seems bizarre considering by 2035, the cost of type 2 diabetes will be more than the cost of cancer to the NHS. To invest in a plan to increase consumption and production of UK fruit and veg is a really cost-effective method to try and reduce that cost. So they're the three challenges. And yeah, we laid out 7 steps which we think would help get the horticultural industry back on its feet. The first being a proper cross-departmental horticulture strategy which aligns DEFRA with education, with health and the Treasury to actually boost the consumption and the production of fruit and veg. The second is to actually regulate retailers properly to spread risk equally across the supply chain so farmers can get more money when they bring their produce to market, and for government to invest in more farmer-focused routes to market, which are inherently better for growers. And the third step I'd like to highlight, there are 7, and please do read the report and share it. The third one is harness the power of public procurement. We have the school fruit and veg scheme, but it's not working properly. And Labour have committed to 50% local, 50% sustainable. That needs to be enshrined in law and properly monitored and enforced. Otherwise, it's kind of meaningless words. So yeah, they're the 3 steps I'd like to highlight, and please do read the report. That's me.
Hi guys, my name is Harry Winslett. I'm the Future Farming Manager at G's. We're growing salads for the UK and European market. About 7,000 hectares of growing in the UK, and about 17,000 hectares across Spain, Poland, the Czech Republic, and we also farm in Senegal. As well as that, I am a 2024 Nuffield Scholar, and I came back from Denmark at midnight last night, having slept in 22 different beds in 25 nights. So forgive me if my brain's slightly jellified at this point. I think, as Will was saying, we face a lot of risk when it comes to production of vegetables, even over that sort of scale. Just writing down some notes in the departures lounge last night of Copenhagen Airport, we have significant challenges with labour in the way that the whole sector do, whether that's the triple threat of the war in Ukraine, Brexit, and still the impact from COVID that we faced 4 years ago, all coming at the same time. Obviously, we face the risk of the climate. We have significant challenges with dry summers in 2022, the wet spring we've just had, and we face these challenges in the same way that small market gardeners and peri-urban agriculturalists do as well. We appreciate that we need to find a better way to grow vegetables. I think we're all being encouraged to eat 5 a day. It's the right thing to do for the health. It's the right thing to do for society. But, production of vegetables has a significant input of tillage, a significant input of chemistry, of water. And to add to that, we're growing a lot of vegetables in the UK on peatlands. And I think we need to address the fact that we are losing carbon from that system. And if we need to be truly regenerative, we need to address how we're going to change the production in peatlands, whether that's continuing to farm with different techniques or changing the types of farming on certain parts of that land. And I think, as you said as well, the supermarkets, we work with the supermarkets, and I think that's a supply chain where, certainly in the cost of living crisis, we need to have food that's affordable for the masses, and the supermarkets do that by driving, very hard bargains, and the margins are very low. But I think we also need to appreciate there's a huge place in our market for, as I said, peri-urban agriculture, small market gardeners, to make sure that we're providing healthy food into our supply chains.
Hello, so I'm Rebecca Laughton, and I'm the Horticulture Campaigns Coordinator for Land Workers Alliance. And I'm going to be speaking from a couple of different perspectives, because many of you will probably know Landworkers Alliance is a union of agroecological farmers, growers and foresters. And so our horticulture campaign efforts are very much uplifting the role that agroecological growers can fulfill. But over the last 4 years, we've also been running an elms test and trial on horticulture, in which we've been working with growers right across the spectrum. So field scale veg growers, soft fruit producers, top fruit producers, glass houses, ornamental, as well as peri-urban and CSA growers and organic growers. So the challenges I'm going to talk about, some of them reach across the board, and Will and Harry have already referred to the low prices, and I won't talk a lot more about that, but I just wanted to point out that for small scale and organic growers, even though there may be a perception that you can get a premium for organic produce, the low prices still affect these growers, because effectively everyone's selling into the same market, and particularly in a cost of living crisis, people, when push comes to shove and they're struggling to get hold of vegetables or fruit, they will go for what they can afford. So the fact that it's possible to get cheap vegetables does really keep a lid on the price, and the realistic price that even organic growers can get. Another challenge, I would say, is the public disconnection with farming and with things like seasonality and the quality it's possible to get. And I think that there needs to be so much education. I mean, it's brought out as a silver bullet education, but I think there needs to be a lot more public engagement and getting people onto farms. And I think there's a real opportunity with small-scale, peri-urban horticulture, community-supported agriculture to really engage with people in a quite meaningful way, so that they can understand about issues like seasonality and what you can do with blemished produce, and that it doesn't all have to look perfect. And then the third challenge I wanted to highlight was the over-focus at the moment by policy on high-tech options. It seems within horticulture that there's a real obsession with things like vertical farming, with controlled environment horticulture, automation, robotics. And I mean, these things, they might be addressing some of the challenges like labour shortages, but it's ignoring the opportunities that the organic sector, the agroecological sector, the short supply chain sector could actually play in bringing solutions to the table. So the opportunities, do you want me to, I've got various opportunities. I'll try and skim through them quite quickly. So elms for horticulture, I think, is a real opportunity. The timetable is that in 2025, DEFRA are going to introduce some horticulture sustainable farming incentive options. And we'd really urge these to include options that encourage care for biodiversity and production on the same land, rather than trying to separate production, intensive production, from conservation and soil care, because these two can really be folded together. Agroecological and organic farmers do it as a matter of course and have been doing it for years. But in our elms trial, we've really found lots of opportunities that conventional and traditional growers could do for introducing really environmentally beneficial options around field margins and even in-field. So, and we also would encourage the inclusion of elms payments for public engagement. I think when we get the next government, there's a real opportunity to introduce a cross-departmental horticulture strategy, and we were deeply disappointed that that was scrapped 2 years ago. So we'd really urge the new government to introduce that and look at how horticulture production can be integrated with health policy, because there are some real wins there. Another opportunity is planning reform, and I think that planning reform and, well, inability to get planning permission both for operational development and for agricultural workers' dwellings is really limiting the potential expansion of certainly agroecological horticulture, but also probably larger scale horticulture too. And then the final opportunity I would point out is for farmer-focused routes to market. There are other ways to sell vegetables and fruits than through supermarkets. And I think, many smaller growers have been doing this for years, but I think there's a real opportunity to massively expand that and get out of the probably less than 5% of the market that we currently hold. So thank you.
It's great to see so many people here. Lucia referred to, I think, was it last year or the year before? Anyway, there are about 10 times as many people. So, horticulture does scare farmers off quite a lot, I think. But anyway, good to see so many people here. So I've been an organic veg grower for 40 years, and in that time have built Riverford from me in a wheelbarrow to packing a veg box every 2 seconds. And in that process, I feel I've made a lot of compromises, actually. The way I've farmed, I haven't always been happy with. Soil loss has become more and more of an issue with changing weather patterns. So I've now gone back to farming actually on a much smaller scale, trying to farm the way I'd like to see everyone farming that cares for the environment and the people working the land. And I'm losing money hand over fist. Which I think, to produce food the way most of us would like to see it produced is just not possible in the current economic climate. But I'm going to really reflect in terms of the challenges. I'll go fairly quickly because I'm going to say the same as everyone else, really. Indeed, horticulture is declining. According to Riverford's survey last year, 49% of growers think it's likely they're going to be out of business within 12 months, and indeed they are going out of business. This is the first year where I think we still don't have UK new potatoes in our boxes because all the farmers have given up. Right around the south coast of the south, well, the coast of the southwest, and there were lots of small family farms who grew, 10 to 100 acres of potatoes as part of a mixed rotation. They've just all got fed up with the returns and the work, and they have given up. And the last one who grew down on the Golden Mile, down near Penzance, gave up last year. And we haven't been able to find. I'm even thinking about going back to growing potatoes myself, but I really shouldn't. But it's crazy. It is happening. We had I was actually travelling around Europe, whenever it was a year ago when we had the tomato shortages and whatever. I can tell you there were no tomato shortages anywhere else in Europe. The reflection that we didn't have any tomatoes and salads on the shelves is that UK supermarkets are such bastards that the UK is the market of last resort. And if anyone possibly has an option to sell elsewhere, they will do. And I think that was a reflection of that. So the challenge is, climate change is huge. It's happening much faster than I think any of us would have expected. And the thing to remember when you're thinking about climate change and the impact on agriculture, it's not the averages, it's the extremes. And true to everyone's predictions, for the last 30 years, that's what we're getting, more of the extremes. The averages actually are changing very, very slowly, but it's the extremes you need to be looking at. Which makes it so hard to plan, and the crop losses that you get when you go outside the acceptable, climatic range for a crop, and you lose that crop. It's the margins are so tiny on your remaining ones. There's really no chance of making that back. So climate change, Brexit, the disruption around Brexit, which I think has been felt mostly in horticulture around Labour. I have quite mixed feelings about access to a kind of underclass of labour which fly around the world to pick the vegetables that we don't want to pick ourselves. But there is no doubt that in the short and medium term, without access to that labour, British horticulture would be declining even faster. Why it's okay for us to have 8 Kenyans working on the farm, but we can't have any more Bulgarians, it just strikes me as a bit bizarre. But anyway, apparently Nigel Farage would be happier with that. And then there's been all the other disruption around the implementation of ELMS, which I thoroughly support. And I think most people recognise the aims as being laudable, but we've just woefully underestimated the practicalities of employing. Public money for public goods implies that you have to be able to put a monetary value on those public goods, and I would say that is. It was perfectly obvious from the outset that was going to be difficult. I don't know why anyone thought it was going to be. Anyway, we are slowly moving in the right direction, but it has been a bit of a rocky ride. And the final one, which I'm probably going to bang on, you better stop me when I've talked for too much, is the supermarkets who have just squeezed the life out of British farming. And I'd be interested to hear, Harry, you will have much more knowledge of this. I haven't sold anything to a supermarket for 22 years. And that, when I finally gave Sainsbury the finger, it was one of the happiest days of my life. And however, their practices make it extremely difficult for anyone else to farm in a decent way, whether that's how they treat their employees or how they treat the environment. There is just not enough money in a supermarket price to support the sort of farming that we want to see. So you can try and differentiate yourself and do it in a different way and tell the story which all the marketers tell that we should be doing. And I think Riverford has been very successful at that. But, I mean, we're all, we have busy lives. We are cognitive misers, i.e. we don't want to spend a lot of time doing research. And, the bullshit that we get from supermarkets with their fake farms, with cosy pictures of free-range chickens, walking around, produced by Willow Farm or whatever. Willow Farm, it might be a cosy little farm with some willows on it. Bollocks! It's run by Cargill, Avaro selling through Tesco's, coming from the Wye Valley and completely destroying that environment. But how can anyone differentiate themselves as producing chickens in a better way when you're faced with that, just utter, lying? And I sat on a stage a year ago with someone who actually tried to produce chickens in a better way for, I think it was Morrison's, but I'm not absolutely sure. And they built a very successful business where they were selling 70% of their eggs to Morrison's, whereupon Morrison's turned round and demanded that they owned that brand. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, I've got, I really fucking loathe what they've done to the industry that I love, I plan to spend, my dying days trying to address that. And possibly, I would love to see, I can't see that actually willfully misleading people. You want me to stop, don't you? Okay.
Thank you, Guy, and thanks, everyone. Something we haven't spoken about too much so far is the dietary perspective, which seems like it's just one other side of the coin. We can't be asking growers to produce more if there's not a reliable demand from people for UK fruit and veg. So I'd like to know what each of you think about how we can grow demand and consumption for UK fruit and veg. And Will, I might come to you.
Yeah, well, I think it starts early. We've got a scheme at the moment called the school fruit and veg scheme, which offers one piece of fruit and veg per day to kids up to year 2. But that's a scheme to try and embed healthy eating habits amongst children. But unfortunately, the way these things work is the contracts have gone out, and it's the cheapest bidder who's got it. So therefore, studies have shown that the fruit and veg supplied to kids is worse in texture, worse in flavour, and has higher pesticides on it than it does in the supermarket shelf. So, ironically, a scheme designed to embed these healthy eating habits is putting kids off. So, fixing that would be a start, and expanding it to year 6 and making sure it's good quality fruit. It should be the best quality fruit and veg we're feeding to primary school children. So, that would be a good start. And I think a second issue is on accessibility and cost. There's lots of people who can't afford it or who are in an environment where they can't access it. And Sustain and Soil Association are trying to address this. We've got a project called Bridging the Gap, which setting up food pilots in Tower Hamlets, food co-ops where vouchers are subsidised for lower income families to allow them to afford a weekly shop and get the veg they need of good quality. And, if the government was to recognise the value of that and to subsidise that a bit for lower income families, that would be a really good start to solve that cost and accessibility issue. So I think they're the 2 points I would say.
Did anyone else want to?
Yes, I just wanted to add, I think that connecting people eating the vegetables with the grower more closely through what we term farmer-focused routes to market. So, I mean, there's direct marketing, but then that's not possible for everyone to sell directly. But farmer-focused routes to market are more responsible retailers who are making sure that the farmer does get a much higher percentage of the what's spent on the produce. But when people are buying a box scheme, which they're getting each week, Growing Communities, a box scheme in Hackney in London, their annual customer survey shows that 85% of their customers eat 5 to 10 portions of fruit and veg a day, which is way, way higher than the national average. And I think part of that's probably because they're buying it anyway. They've spent the money. They've got this regular box coming in. I'd be interested in whether you've done similar research at Riverford. But I think that when you're buying and when you've got more engagement with the farmer and you're appreciating the way the produce is grown, and I appreciate that people are paying more for this, but I think that if there could be more subsidies to enable more people to access that kind of vegetable direct from genuine farms rather than fake farms like Willow Farm, that would be really helpful. And then the other thing that would be really helpful is public procurement using local and organic and agroecological or people in transition to more sustainable methods produce. There's a brilliant project in Wales, Welsh Veg into Schools, where a very forward-thinking wholesaler is actually subsidising the difference between local organic vegetables and imported non-organic vegetables. They started off just with courgettes into schools in Cardiff 2 years ago. They expanded it to a range of different vegetables across 3 counties last year. And they're really working to embed this, certainly across southwest Wales. But public procurement, and there are some brilliant examples in Denmark and in France of such projects which are really changing people's habits and embedding healthy eating habits of really delicious, tasty vegetables and fruits into people's diets.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying around £2 billion every year goes into public procurement.
Yes.
So even if half of that was directed towards agroecological and nature-friendly produce, that would
be really game-changing. And that would also give a really secure market to many, many growers, because they'd know that they could sell their produce every week to someone, and that would really give confidence to people to invest in the future if that was a scheme that was embedded for a good long time.
I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's okay.
That's all right.
This one, you spoke a little bit about climate change, if you did. I'd like to know what climate resilience looks like to you in horticulture. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think in the situation we're in, we need to move our system towards a system that takes more from the agroecological sphere and take the sorts of practices that are being implemented on smaller farms and try and translate them into larger horticulture and field scale horticulture. So, I mean, it's still there's a playbook that needs to be written, and because of the niche aspects of each individual crop, there's not really a plug and play playbook for regenerative horticulture yet. So a lot of it that we're trying to do at the moment is there's a lot of trials work. There's a lot of trying to understand the nuance of each of those different systems within a rotation that has maybe 4 vegetable crops per 10 years. And we're having to sort of make those plans and those transition as we go. So I think there needs to be an understanding that comes with an inherent amount of risk when we're talking about cover cropping or integration of livestock into the system again. But when we start to be able to see the change in the soil and see the change in the landscape and see the change in the biodiversity that we have on farm, you do inherently produce a more resilient system. And I think we're starting to see that, but the transition is slow because there is still the amount of tillage that needs to go along with horticultural production, and there is still an amount of pesticide application that is somewhat linked to what the supermarkets are demanding. So I think resilience to the changing climate can be achieved in a horticultural system, but I think it's slow, and I think it's a case of chipping away and playing a game of snakes and ladders where maybe you're making movements forward during certain break crops, and then you have to, when Guy's talking about his potatoes, you take a hit in that system. But as long as you're moving forward to a more regenerative and resilient system in time, I think it can be achieved.
Guy, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think resilience is all about taking back control, actually. So, and that's control of the elements, really, most particularly water. So, drainage. I mean, I'm sure on my farm in France, we've invested a huge amount in drainage, and I've, wish I'd spent more, actually. In irrigation, with, water storage, so that, when we get the droughts, you can water your crops. For tunnels, so, almost all strawberries in the UK are grown under tunnels now, so moving the crops inside. I mean, it's not all good, it comes with some costs. And then there are a few things we have in Devon on some very steep slopes, up to 25%. And we have, about 4 years ago, did have a catastrophic soil loss event. As a summer thunderstorm when we were about to sow a green manure, actually, and we lost absolutely horrendous, over 1,000 tons of soil in 20 minutes. And as a result of that field will never be ploughed. It's gone into an agroforestry planted with hazelnuts with grass in between. So a lot more of that, shorter rows. So there's less fetch when you do get runoff. So trying to keep them ideally no longer than 100 metres. We're experimenting quite a lot with perennial crops, so, trying to reduce the amount of tillage. Though I have to say I'm not completely convinced that tillage, I mean, the longer I farm, the more I appreciate I don't know, actually. And I think trying to come up with universal solutions for problems that vary so much with climate, trying to farm on my farm in France, which is only 250 miles further south, with the same varieties and techniques that worked in Devon, was pretty disastrous. So it's very site specific. And there is a movement of crops. I mean, we buy a lot of stuff from Spain, not quite as much as the national statistics, but more than I would like. And water shortage has been so crucial over the last 3 years, particularly, that there's a movement of crops north from Spain, probably away from Andalusia and the Murcia region, up into Catalonia, but they've had some of the worst droughts, so that's probably enough, isn't it? Yeah.
Last question from me, and then I'll hand over to the floor. But this is a policy report, so I would be keen to hear briefly from each of you on if you had one request from the new government for a change in policy that would support resilience in UK horticulture or in fruit and veg consumption, what would that be? And Will, I'll start with you.
Properly regulating the supermarkets, with giving the regulator actual teeth to go in there. I mean, I've spoken to people who are, for instance, the regulator, the Groceries Code Adjudicator, it's a really boring regulator, but everyone who's ever raised a complaint with that from abroad has been delisted instantly after the complaint. So there's a culture of fear, and that needs to be got rid of completely. So giving that regulator teeth.
Even their relatives, actually.
Yeah. Go on.
Well, I mean, we had one story that someone, their uncle got a bit gobby about supermarket practice, and their nephew was told unless he shut up, that they would be losing their sales.
Yeah, it's outrageous. Yeah. So that would be my recommendation. That has to happen. Yeah.
I actually think that there's a lot of money that's going into larger farms like G's and field scale. I mean, there's like farm productivity grants towards automation and those sorts of practices where you can claim 50% of costs up to £1.5 million. And I actually think there is a lot of money going into these larger production systems like ours. I actually think that there needs to be more support for peri-urban agriculture. There needs to be more support for market gardeners. We need a diversity of production across the system, because we can produce a large amount of food, but we need everyone to produce a large amount of food that's available right across society. So I think there needs to be more diversity in who can claim for those sorts of grants.
You've taken the words right out of my mouth, Harry. I was going to ask for a market garden startup grant and a market garden development grant that enables people to invest in the kit that they need just to start up or develop market gardens, rather than making people have to pay for really cutting-edge, innovative equipment. A lot of people just simply need the kit, the polytunnels, the fencing, the crop covers, the propagation equipment. So a really good, well-researched, well-funded market garden startup grant, but also doubling the agriculture budget generally so that we can have a really decently funded ELMS scheme, which rewards horticulture alongside all the other elements of agriculture. So doubling at least the agriculture budget would be good.
My plea is influenced quite heavily by hearing Mike Berners-Lee here last year, who ended his talk with that we have no hope of addressing, I'm paraphrasing here, no hope of addressing our climate and environmental crisis until we start seeing honesty. And he was particularly talking about politicians, but people in business. And we've sunk to such low levels in terms of expecting to be lied to. Yet at the same time, I've lived my entire adult life under a neoliberal economic system where the assumption is that the market will deliver the solution to anything, whatever the problem, the market will provide the solutions. And I mean, it's obvious, if you go and read Adam Smith, one of the conditions of his perfect market was perfect knowledge. And if you don't have perfect knowledge and you have people willfully misleading, that can't work. So if you are a neoliberal economics, we've had certainly 14 years of, I would say, increasingly extreme neoliberal economics and getting rid of all regulation, you have to have honesty if you believe in that system. So, having I'm going to go back to it again, a load of mendacious lies, to put a picture of a chicken surrounded by grass, that is clearly misleading when that never has seen any grass and it's kept indoors all the time. It should. I would like to see the law change so that it is illegal to willfully mislead people.
Great, thank you everyone. Right, questions from the floor. I'm going to start with Vicky because, I feel like that seat was there for you, Vicky.
I feel a bit like a plant, which is appropriate. But I'm going to be very brief because we've had some fantastic presentations. And I now work for the Wildlife Trust and lead an agriculture, the Wildlife Trust. And we've done this report with Sustain and Soil Association because all of it matters. Wildlife Trust is about health and well-being as much as natural health and well-being are health. So we think all of it needs to happen, and there's lots of great stuff in there. But I did want to just mention what Harry talked about, which was about the lowland peat soils, where 22% of our vegetables are grown, the potatoes and the leeks, etc., and in the fens. And this is a catastrophe if it continues as this. It's a climate catastrophe because there's a huge amount of carbon in those soils, nature catastrophe, water retention, tragedy, ecosystem tragedy. So we need to find a way, and we've got solutions in the report briefly, to move a lot of that horticulture and the arable, especially the arable for animal feeds, and the other crops off there, especially eco-fuels for cars. Growing car fuel on peatland soils, absolute madness. So we need to move that all off and help farmers elsewhere to start growing fruit and veg. And that will need us and supermarkets changing specifications because those peatland soils are so perfect for growing veg. You get, unblemished produce. So we need to start to think about cosmetic standards in a big way. So I'll leave it there, but there's great stuff in the report. Chapter 2 is about peatlands. So thank you for letting me to say that.
No worries. Thank you, Vicky. I might just let Harry come back to that with any reflections, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think we're not immune, and we're not pretending that there's no problem with growing vegetables on peatland soils. We understand the size of the prize, and that's why I went out and wanted to do a Nuffield and understand what the different systems that are available. Are there situations that will allow us to continue farming vegetables in a far more carbon-friendly way? And I know that you've also touched on biodiversity and water. I was shocked when I went out to the Netherlands, Germany and Denmark in the last 4 weeks that nobody's really growing vegetables on peatlands. It seems so natural, having come from a system outside of farming, that peatland vegetable production is really all I've known. And actually the peatlands in mainland Europe are being used predominantly for grass growing and for dairy. And where people have access to water and flat land, they are predominantly growing their vegetables on mineral soils. So I think there's a question about are we growing the vegetables specifically on the peatland because of the nitrogenous and nutritious value of them, or is it because of the access to water? And if we want to move vegetable production away from peatlands, how are we going to do that in a way where we can get access to water reliably enough so that we can continue to produce vegetables to the specification that the market requires? I think that's. I also get your point about not growing animal feed and biofuels, and I completely appreciate. The challenge that we also have is that this is all part of a rotation, and if you were to grow vegetables repeatedly on the same patch of land with the inputs of tillage and the inputs of water and the inputs of fertilizer that is still required to some degree, what would be the opportunity cost of either doing that or moving to producing on mineral soils where there would be other inputs that would also be required? So I think it's we're not blind to the fact that there is a problem, but we just need to find out a solution that means that we're not either importing or moving, just outsourcing the cost elsewhere.
And final point from B on this.
Yes, I just wanted to make the point that there's a real opportunity to distribute vegetable production around the country to produce vegetables much closer to where they're needed. And there's a real belief that you can only grow vegetables on grade 1 and grade 2 agricultural land. But many of our members, just because they can't get hold of grade 1 and grade 2 agricultural land, they've been growing them perfectly well on grade 3 lands, mainly by putting in quite high labour inputs. But I think even though you might hear the argument, well, the right land is only in certain parts of the country, actually I think that there's perfectly good land in rings around cities. And if people adopted the food zones model of growing urban, peri-urban and rural hinterland vegetables, that's not exclusively, but producing the majority of vegetables closer to where they're needed, that would really help. And our Horticulture Across 4 Nations report, which I've stupidly forgotten to bring, but come to the Land Workers Alliance stall, sets out a vision of how that could be achieved.
Thank you, Bea. Right, next question.
On the peat thing, I'm really delighted that it has been brought up. I mean, it's been there in the background. I mean, we're sponsoring a trial in peat-free growing medium, but honestly, it is a trivial irrelevance compared to the cultivation of the fens. I'm pretty sure, Harry, we sell your organic celery, actually, and it is just jaw-droppingly brilliant. It's impossible to grow celery of that quality. I haven't seen it, on anything other than a peat soil. I'm pretty sure it's grown on a peat soil. So you kind of set the standard with something which is incredibly environmentally destructive, which is forcing other people to follow suit. And G's is a very big and profitable, and I'm pretty sure one of the better big horticultural companies. That's always the impression that I get. But I think sometimes you just got to say no. You can't just say, because I can make money out of it, I'm going to do it. Sometimes you've got to turn around and say, no, I'm just not doing that.
Sorry, I just feel like this could be
Sorry, and we should probably not be buying it either.
I feel
but
like people might have questions, so we can pick it up afterwards.
I'm your nightmare on the left, aren't I?
Hi, my name's Adam Vaughan. I work at The Times. I just wanted to ask the panel, all of you, what can consumers do to boost UK horticulture, because you've talked about lots of other levers. And the second question was, I was quite struck by something you said, Guy, about the UK new potatoes. I just wondered, why are UK new potato farmers, why have they struggled so much? I just wanted to unpack what you were saying. Were you saying that you can't get them for veg boxes, or you're not getting them full stop in UK shops?
If I can, I'll just address that point. It's quite particular, the potato industry. They tend to be on these coastal farms because they're frost-free and you can plant early. I'm talking about early potatoes. And whereas the main crop potatoes is done on a huge scale on vast farms that largely level and lend themselves to mechanization. These early potatoes have been traditionally grown on family farms, originally getting seaweed off the beach to fertilize the farms and so on. And those are the ones that are particularly suffering, I would say. The whole middle of British horticulture has just been hollowed out. So we have the big companies like G's, and then we have the growers that Rebecca, I think, is representing, which are working on a much, much smaller scale. And we so desperately need the ones in the middle, but those are the ones that we're losing, and it's just a tragedy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then on the consumption side, who wants to come in on that first?
Yeah, well, I think those in urban areas can get involved with peri-urban farming, for instance. Sustain have published a few toolkits of exactly how they can do that. Consumers can get involved campaigning for peri-urban farming, more market gardens, and if you can afford it, buy from those places too. And also there's, Riverford have done amazing campaigns. Supporting those campaigns makes a real difference. It was people's signatures on the petition last year which got a debate in Parliament. So there's a lot people can do.
Yes, I would say just try and avoid using supermarkets. I think that buying from alternatives, whatever you can afford, but buying direct from the farmer or from a box scheme doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be more expensive. And actually, sometimes it can be even more reasonable. But really uplifting and supporting all the alternatives to supermarkets and using your consumer clout. I hate the word consumers, but you do have power to change. The power also needs to be changed in other dimensions, but individuals can choose where they buy their produce.
Great. Next question. I'll go to the lady in the third row.
Just points, really, not questions. When Will talked about the rotten fruit being provided by public subsidy to some small kids in London, I went on a trip to Italy a long time ago, about the turn of the century, and we went on a trip looking at school meals, and we ended up having lunch with the mayor in tiny primary school tables in Venice, eating organic pasta with organic olive oil, and so different, and they give the best cuts of meat to the kiddies. So there's one change. The other thing I wanted to say, I did hear the farming programme this morning, and the Labour shadow farm man says they're going to do public procurement of food, so that's a good start.
Yes,
really.
it is a good start. They've committed to 50% local or sustainable. It'd be better if that all was an and.
Yeah.
But it needs to be enshrined into the legal binding standards. Needs to be enshrined into law, because otherwise, who's going to enforce it? Who's going to monitor it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there needs to be budget for it too. So yeah, it's definitely a good start, and it's something we can hold them to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. There was another thing, but I've forgotten.
Thank you. I'll come to the lady in the front row, please.
Hi, I'm Tracy Worcester. Forbidden Fruit and Veg Market Garden and Farms Not Factories. I wonder if any of you come across politicians who actually don't really want us to eat food grown in the soil anymore. And actually, if you read Sainsbury's Future of Food, it's about us eating meat from a lab and worms and insects, and they're quite open about it. And here we are talking about real food and how we can improve real food. And when you say Labour Party sustainable or local, well, both of those in their books can be in a vertical farm, it can be an insect farm, it can be the most revolting type of junk food on steroids that they'll say is nutritious. And it's like, talk about lies. I mean, you have the scientists who will tell them, so they're not lies. They're just who's bought these politicians? Have we any hope of going in a more sustainable, real food in the soil future?
I think the hope is in us demanding that we do have a soil and sun-derived future. I mean, it seems absurd to me that there's this obsession with vertical farming, not only growing hydroponically, but also using renewable energy to generate light and heat to produce salad crops, when the sun is an incredibly powerful thing that has powered food production for generations. So I think we need to really say firmly that we want food to be produced in the soil, outside. And the other thing I think about some of these high-tech solutions is we're not being told about the embodied energy of the infrastructure needed. And I don't actually know what the statistics are, but in my gut feeling is that there must be enormous embodied energy, because if you think about the obsolescence of these schemes, I mean, I heard that about 200 acres of glass houses in the Lee Valley were being destroyed a couple of years ago. And they were hydroponic glass houses, but because all the equipment was out of date. Just imagine the speed of waste that's going to happen when all these warehouses get overtaken by something else. And all of those stacks and trays are not going to be usable for anything else. So I think we really need to be told the truth about that too, or demand the truth.
Thank you. Harry?
Yeah, we did a bit of work internally that looked at the energy efficiency of growing outdoors versus growing indoors, and it came out as about 120 times more energy efficient to grow outdoors using the sun, the rain, and the soil than it is to grow indoors. So I think, you know, if people are pushing in that direction, then there's going to be an enormous cost, especially with energy prices as they have been in recent years. So I think we're still going to be producing the overwhelming quantity of our food outdoors. I mean, plants inherently have big green leaf architecture that captures sunlight and funnels water down towards the root zone. That's the inherent nature of a plant. And I think if you start trying to manipulate that using artificial techniques, I think then it's going to be a massive, massive problem.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the back? Because I feel like I've been... gentleman in the navy t-shirt. I think someone's...
There's one there.
For the Times guy, I would just say, educate yourself as a consumer. So read books like Tim Lang's Feeding Britain, Henry Dimbleby's Ravenous, Rooted, books like that, because there's a lot going on that when you go to the supermarket you don't realise. But my question is probably more to Guy and Harry around how do you feel horticulture, and I'm talking probably kind of intensive field production rather than hydroponic and glasshouse, is fitting into regen. You know, it's quite intensive cultivation still. I know it's foliar feeding probably, but I would kind of think of it more soil as substrate. You know, it's still very much you beat it and you kind of getting it to do exactly what you want. And how you, particularly with your nut field, how are you kind of reconciling that difference?
As I said earlier, I think it's a case of doing the trials and taking the steps where we can. We started out trying to sort of turn our farming into much more regenerative techniques around 2016-17. And now we don't have a bare hectare on the farm over winter. We've got livestock incorporated back into the rotation. Our nitrogen fertilizer inputs are down by about 50% in that time. We've got living material growing in wheelings and flowering strips. So it is possible to do. It's just you have to figure out all of these things by yourself as you go along, because there's not people of the same scale who are working in these same sorts of systems where you can borrow those techniques from each other quite as easily. So it's a case of taking what a lot of people are doing and then manipulating it to work in horticulture. But I believe it's inherently possible, and I think actually we all need to be doing it and learning from the smaller farmers who have been doing it for a long time very well.
And you told me that a lot of the things you're doing in that transition are actually cost neutral or negative?
Yeah, I mean, even if you take out any sort of subsidies, the actual cost of the changing from a plough-based system with significant cultivation and fertilizer input, it's cheaper to go into a far more regenerative system with much lower intensities of cultivation. We can produce the same yield of food doing that, and the cover cropping, and you earn that back in the reductions in pesticide and fertilizer. So it's not that it's costing us more to do this; we're actually saving money hectare by hectare, and it's a profit driver. It's an economic driver as well as a sustainability one. So it doesn't need to be an or; it can be an and.
I think we've got a couple of minutes. Did you want
You're
to
going to let me?
Yeah.
Horticulture is just a disaster for the soil. Most conventional. I mean, be honest, it is only 2% of the land area, so maybe we shouldn't get too hung up about it. But most vegetables are. I think the plough is probably the least of the villain. It's the bed former that follows it, which it just beats the hell out of the soil. You know, every time you plant a crop to get this super fine, super consistent seed bed, which will provide a consistent crop which can be harvested mechanically and will meet supermarkets' requirements for consistency. So it's going to be very difficult to try. I know that you've made tremendous progress in reducing some of the cultivations and the inputs, but I mean, horticulture is pretty bad news, and it would be so wonderful if we could get more of our food from perennial crops. As when I go to East Africa, the farmers that I work with there, most of their calories do come from perennial crops, and they are grown in very complex mixed systems. I mean, it's, we've got a mountain to climb to get to that, but we're Riverford, we are sponsoring a project to look at, for instance, perennial kales and perennial onions and so on. I have to say, commercially, it's not looking very promising, but again, a bit of a mountain to climb. But yeah, there are, horticulture has got a long way to go to be sustainable, I would say.
Great. Unfortunately, that's us out of time, I think. So I just wanted to thank the speakers again for your time and to everyone for coming. And if you have any questions about the report, we're in the Soil Association tent and there's others around as well. So yeah, come chat. Thank you.